The city was alive with shining towers, busy streets, and the constant noise of ambition. At the very top of one of those towers sat a man who believed he had it all. He was a CEO, young, wealthy, and full of confidence. To the outside world, he was a success story written in golden letters. People admired him, feared him, and spoke his name with respect. Yet behind all that glitter, there was something else about him, something many noticed but few dared to mention. He carried himself with arrogance, as if no one around him could ever match his intelligence or skill. The CEO had a love for chess. It was not just a game for him, it was proof of his cleverness, his ability to control, to plan, and to win. Whenever he played against someone from his circle of wealthy friends, he always won. He often laughed at their mistakes, and his victories made him feel superior. For him, chess was more than a board with black and white squares. It was a throne where he could sit above everyone else. On a bright afternoon, the company was celebrating an important deal. The employees gathered in the large conference hall, decorated with banners and golden lights. There was music, there was food, and people were talking about how far the company had come under the leadership of the CEO. Everyone clapped when he stood to speak, his voice smooth and full of self-praise. He spoke about hard work, about vision, but in truth, he believed it was all his genius that had made everything possible. As the laughter and chatter grew, someone brought out a chessboard. The CEO's eyes sparkled at the sight. He had always enjoyed showing off his chess skills in front of a crowd. He adjusted his tie, smirked, and looked around at the people who worked under him. "Does anyone dare challenge me?" he said with a playful arrogance. "You all know I'm unbeatable. But I'll make it more interesting." He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the room. "If anyone can beat me in chess, I'll marry them." The room erupted in laughter. People clapped and cheered, thinking it was a harmless joke. Some whispered to each other, amused by the CEO's confidence. Nobody believed anyone in that room could stand a chance against him. To many, chess seemed like a complicated world of strategies, one only the smartest could navigate. And here was their boss, a man of wealth and status, claiming to be a king on that very board. But in the corner of the room, standing quietly with a mop and bucket, was the janitor. He was a man with dark skin, dressed in a faded uniform. Most people never noticed him unless the floor needed cleaning or a light bulb had to be changed. He was quiet, gentle in his movements, and rarely spoke more than a few words. For years, he had worked in the building, sweeping hallways and scrubbing floors while the world of wealth and power passed by him as if he were invisible. That day, however, something stirred inside him when he heard the CEO's words. The challenge was bold, almost mocking, and though the room was filled with laughter, the janitor did not laugh. He stood still, his eyes resting on the chessboard, and memories began to rise within him, memories of quiet evenings in his childhood, sitting under a small lamp, learning the game from his grandfather. Chess had once been his secret world, a place where the mind mattered more than money, where anyone could be a king if they saw the right moves. As the CEO leaned back, enjoying the sound of his own voice, the janitor slowly put down his mop. A hush spread across the few people standing near him as he took a step forward. His voice was soft but steady. "I'll play you," he said. The room froze for a moment. Then came the whispers. Some chuckled, some gasped, and some shook their heads. The janitor? Really? People had known him for years but never imagined he had the courage to step forward in such a bold moment. A few employees tried to wave him back, whispering that it wasn't a good idea, but the janitor's eyes did not waver from the board. The CEO raised his eyebrows, then laughed. "You," he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Do you even know how the pieces move?" The crowd joined in his laughter, but the janitor did not flinch. He simply nodded, his calmness unsettling some of the people who were watching. "Very well, the CEO said, standing up and gesturing toward the chessboard. "Come forward. Let's give the people a show." The janitor walked slowly to the table, his steps measured, his face calm. He sat across from the CEO, his hands resting gently on his knees. The employees gathered around, forming a circle. Some whispered bets on how long it would take before the janitor lost. Others pulled out their phones, ready to capture the moment for amusement later. The CEO sat with a wide grin, feeling the attention of the room. To him, this was the perfect stage, a chance to humiliate someone far beneath him while reminding everyone else who was in charge. He leaned forward, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Remember what I said? Beat me, and I'll marry you. But don't worry," he added with a smirk, "I'll try to make it quick, so you don't embarrass yourself too much." The janitor gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. The board was set. The pieces gleamed under the bright lights of the hall. Black and white stood in their places, waiting for the battle to begin. The crowd hushed, leaning in, ready to witness the strange match between a wealthy CEO and a man who usually carried cleaning supplies instead of chess pieces. The CEO made the first move, his hands swift and confident. The janitor watched carefully, his eyes following every detail. He took his time, then made his own move, smooth and deliberate. The game had begun, but what no one yet knew was that in this quiet man's heart lived a strategy so sharp, so precise, that the arrogance of the CEO would soon crumble before it. And so, the hall that had started the day with laughter and cheers now held its breath. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and the story of a challenge spoken with pride was about to turn into something unforgettable. The hall grew silent as the pieces on the board stood ready for battle. The CEO's smile was wide, his confidence unshaken, as if he was already the winner before the game had even begun. He leaned back slightly, looked around the circle of employees, and smirked. He enjoyed this, the attention, the whispers, the disbelief that a janitor had dared to step forward. For him, this wasn't just a game, it was entertainment, a show of power, and he intended to crush his opponent quickly, leaving everyone with another reason to admire him. The janitor sat quietly across from him. His posture was calm, his face steady, and his eyes rested softly on the board. He did not look at the crowd, nor did he respond to the laughter or doubtful whispers. His entire focus was on the arrangement of the pieces. For him, the board was not a place of ego. It was a place of clarity, of quiet logic, and of memory. He remembered evenings long ago when he had played countless matches with his grandfather, who often reminded him that in chess, as in life, it wasn't the loudest voice that won, but the sharpest mind. The CEO made his first move quickly, sliding a pawn forward with a flourish of his hand. The sound of the piece clicking against the board echoed in the silent room. The janitor studied the move for a moment, then gently placed his own pawn forward, steady and precise. A few employees exchanged glances. Some were surprised he even knew how to move correctly. Others chuckled quietly, thinking he was only delaying the inevitable. The CEO wasted no time in making his second move, playing aggressively, as was his style. He believed in dominance, in attacking early to rattle his opponents. It had always worked before. He looked up at the janitor, waiting to see fear, hesitation, or at least a flicker of nervousness. But there was nothing. The janitor's face remained calm, his eyes moving across the board as if tracing invisible lines only he could see. Then, with quiet confidence, he moved his knight. The employees leaned closer. They might not have all understood the details of the game, but they could sense something unusual. The janitor wasn't moving randomly. His moves were purposeful, carefully chosen. The CEO laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "Not bad," he said mockingly, "but you'll have to do better than that." He played his third move, setting up what he thought was a strong attack. And then it happened. The janitor looked down at the board, studied it for a brief moment, and then, with the same quiet calmness, moved his piece into place. The moment his hand left the piece, a sharp silence fell over the crowd. The CEO leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He blinked once, then twice, staring at the board as if something had gone wrong. He picked up a piece, put it down again, and studied every possible move. His face grew pale. The janitor's voice, soft but steady, broke the silence. "Checkmate." Gasps filled the room. Employees covered their mouths, some whispering in disbelief. The CEO froze in his seat, unable to move, his confidence shattering in front of his own eyes. He had been beaten. Not just beaten, but beaten in only 3 moves. The room, which had been filled with laughter moments ago, was now alive with shock. Phones that had been lifted to record the humiliation of the janitor were now capturing the humiliation of the CEO. The CEO leaned back in his chair, staring at the board, searching for a mistake. He retraced the moves in his mind, trying to see how it was possible. But it was undeniable the janitor had played with precision, setting up a trap so swift and sharp that he had walked straight into it without even realizing. For the janitor, there was no gloating, no boastful smile. He simply folded his hands in his lap and sat quietly, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. To him, it was just a game, just another puzzle solved, another lesson that brilliance is not always loud or proud, it is sometimes humble and quiet. The employees, however, could not stay quiet. The whispers grew louder. "Did you see that?" one said. "3 moves." "3," another exclaimed. Some clapped nervously, not sure if it was allowed, while others simply stared at the janitor with newfound respect. The CEO's face turned red, his pride burning under the weight of all the eyes on him. He forced a laugh, trying to mask his embarrassment. "Well," he said, his voice strained, "I wasn't paying attention. Let's call it luck." But his words rang hollow. Everyone had seen what happened. It was not luck. It was skill, sharp and undeniable. The janitor stood slowly, giving a small nod of respect toward the CEO. He did not wait for praise, nor did he demand recognition. His simple gesture said everything: the game was over, and so was the illusion of the CEO's unbeatable strength. The crowd parted as he picked up his mop and quietly returned to his corner. For years, he had been invisible, just a shadow moving through the hallways with his tools. But in that moment, every single person in the room looked at him differently. They saw not just a janitor, but a man of intelligence, of quiet dignity, of hidden brilliance. The CEO remained seated, staring at the board long after the janitor had gone back to his work. His smile was gone, replaced by a tightness in his jaw. He had always believed himself untouchable, always thought no one from outside his world of wealth and power could stand against him. And yet here he was, defeated in front of everyone, undone in less than 5 minutes by a man he had never once respected enough to notice. The employees slowly began to disperse, though the whispers never stopped. The story was already spreading from person to person, from phone to phone, like fire catching in dry grass. What had begun as a joke by the CEO was quickly turning into a legend about the janitor. And so, the game ended, but the impact was only beginning. The janitor had won with grace, in silence, in 3 perfect moves. The CEO had lost not just a match but also the armor of pride he had worn so confidently. The balance in the room had shifted, and though the janitor returned to cleaning floors, he carried with him a quiet victory that no one could ever take away. The board was still in place when the crowd began to drift away, but the memory of what had happened refused to leave the room. The sound of the janitor's calm voice saying "checkmate" echoed in everyone's mind, and the image of the CEO sitting speechless stayed as sharp as the pieces on the board. Employees whispered to each other in small groups, their eyes darting toward the janitor, who had quietly returned to his corner with the mop in his hand. He did not act like a hero. He did not even smile. Yet the weight of what he had done was heavier than anything else that day. Phones buzzed as employees sent messages to friends and family. Some even replayed the videos they had secretly recorded, shaking their heads in disbelief. 3 moves, they kept repeating. It seemed impossible, almost like a trick. But it had happened, and they had all seen it with their own eyes. A janitor, the man everyone overlooked, had brought down the mighty CEO in the very game he used to prove his intelligence. The CEO remained at the table long after the match ended. He sat still, his hand resting near the board, his mind replaying every move. He wanted to tell himself that it was luck, that the janitor had stumbled into a rare opening. But no matter how many times he tried to rearrange the logic in his head, he could not escape the truth. The janitor had known exactly what he was doing. The trap had been laid, and the CEO had walked right into it. The humiliation burned inside him. He could feel the weight of his employees' stares, the whispers behind his back. For years, he had been untouchable in their eyes, a man above mistakes. Now, in the span of minutes, that image had cracked. He clenched his fists under the table, forcing his face into a stiff smile when people walked past. But his pride was wounded deeply, and nothing he said could cover it. Meanwhile, the janitor worked quietly, pushing the mop along the shining floor. To him, the game was over, and life went on. He did not bask in glory, nor did he search for approval. Yet something inside him felt lighter. For years, he had been invisible, his presence barely acknowledged beyond a polite nod or a passing glance. But now, when people looked at him, their eyes held curiosity, surprise, and even respect. It was a change he had never asked for, but one that had come to him all the same. The story spread quickly through the company. By the end of the day, even those who had not been in the hall knew what had happened. Secret recordings traveled across phones, and soon, the clip of the janitor declaring checkmate was played again and again in hushed corners. Employees who once passed him without notice now greeted him with smiles, some even stopping to ask questions. "How did you do it?" they would whisper. The janitor only smiled softly and said, "It's just a game." But to the employees, it was more than that. It was a lesson. For years, they had watched the CEO tower over them with his arrogance, using chess as another tool to prove his greatness. And now, the very man who polished their floors had shown that brilliance did not always wear a suit. It could live quietly in places no one cared to look. The CEO tried to regain control in the following days. He avoided the topic of the match, acting as though it had never happened. In meetings, he spoke louder, carried himself with greater force, as if to remind everyone that he was still in charge. But the memory lingered in the eyes of his employees. No matter how confidently he spoke, no matter how hard he tried to carry himself, the image of him being defeated in 3 moves hung over him like a shadow. For the janitor, life continued in its usual rhythm. He arrived early, cleaned the halls, fixed broken lights, and emptied the trash. Yet everywhere he went, people treated him differently. Some looked at him with admiration, some with curiosity, and some even with envy. A few younger employees began bringing chessboards to the break room, hoping to learn from him. At first, they were shy to ask, but when one finally gathered the courage to invite him for a match, the janitor agreed with a gentle nod. He played patiently, teaching them with every move, showing them traps, strategies, and the quiet beauty of the game. Soon, the break room was filled with laughter and chatter during lunch hours, as small groups gathered around the janitor to watch him play. He never bragged, never mocked their mistakes. He guided them, explained moves softly, and encouraged them to think ahead. For the first time, employees began to see him not just as the man who cleaned their offices, but as a teacher, a thinker, and a man with depth. The CEO heard about this, of course. It bothered him more than he could admit. The idea that his employees were gathering around the janitor, respecting him, and learning from him made his pride ache. He wanted to reclaim the throne he had lost. More than once, he thought about challenging the janitor again, hoping to win back his dignity. But deep inside, fear held him back. What if he lost again? What if the janitor defeated him once more, this time in front of even more witnesses? The risk was too great, and so he remained silent. One evening, as the janitor was leaving the building, an employee walked up to him. She was young, new to the company, and had always looked down when she passed him in the hall. But now, she smiled nervously and asked, "Sir, may I ask you something? How did you learn to play like that?" The janitor paused, his eyes softening as he remembered. "My grandfather," he said simply. "He taught me when I was a boy. He always said chess is like life. If you rush, you fall into traps. If you wait, you see the truth." The employee nodded, her respect deepening. She realized then that the janitor carried not only skill but also wisdom. Word of his story spread further. People outside the company began to hear whispers of the tale. A few of the employees shared it with friends, and soon, it became a story told in cafes, in dinner conversations, and even online. The details grew with every retelling, but the heart of it remained the same: a janitor had defeated a CEO in 3 moves, proving that brilliance can live in the most unexpected places. The janitor, however, remained unchanged. He did not chase the fame or the whispers. He continued to sweep, to mop, to repair, and to smile softly at those who now greeted him warmly. In his heart, he knew the game had been more than a match. It had been a moment of truth. A moment that reminded everyone, even himself, that respect and wisdom are not tied to titles or wealth. They can belong to anyone, even a man with a mop in his hand. And though the CEO tried to bury the memory, the story only grew stronger with time. The employees carried it like a secret treasure, passing it on with pride. For them, it was more than a victory on a board. It was a lesson they would never forget. The days after the match were uneasy for the CEO. He walked through the office halls with his usual straight posture and sharp suit, but the atmosphere around him had changed. Before, employees would rush to greet him, eager to impress or at least to be noticed by him. Now, their smiles carried something different. Some looked at him with amusement, others with hidden smirks, and many avoided his eyes altogether, worried their expressions might reveal too much. Though no one dared mention the chess game to his face, the silence spoke louder than words. The CEO felt it in every meeting, every handshake, every polite nod. His image of perfection had been broken, and no matter how he tried to cover it, the pieces refused to come back together. He spoke louder in meetings, he interrupted more often, and he pushed his opinions harder, as if volume could hide the crack in his pride. But deep down, he knew his employees remembered. Meanwhile, the janitor's life seemed unchanged on the surface. He continued arriving early, sweeping the floors, polishing the glass doors, and emptying trash bins. Yet everyone who passed him looked at him differently. Some smiled warmly, some nodded with genuine respect, and a few stopped to thank him for small things they had never noticed before. He accepted it all with quiet grace, never demanding more, never boasting about what he had done. What surprised people most was his humility. The janitor never once brought up the victory, never teased or mocked the CEO, even when others whispered and laughed behind his back. When younger employees asked him to play chess, he would accept with a smile, showing them moves and explaining strategies, always patient, always gentle. He treated the game not as a tool to show power but as a chance to share knowledge. This quiet dignity only made the story grow. Outside the company, the tale of the janitor who defeated the CEO spread further. It was told in casual conversations, shared on social media, and even written about in small articles that highlighted unusual moments of wisdom in everyday life. The CEO's name was never directly mentioned, but those inside the company knew the truth, and that truth weighed heavily on him. One evening, the CEO sat alone in his office. The city lights glittered beyond the window, but he did not admire them the way he used to. He stared at the chessboard on his desk, the same board he had once used to entertain his wealthy friends. Now, it felt like a reminder of his defeat, a mirror reflecting his arrogance back at him. He tried to practice, moving pieces across the board, setting up openings and counters, but the memory of that short match haunted him. No matter how many moves he replayed, he could not erase the simple truth: the janitor had been better. His pride wrestled with his thoughts. Part of him wanted to challenge the janitor again, to prove to himself and everyone else that the first match had been a mistake. But fear gnawed at him. What if he lost again? What if the janitor defeated him once more, this time with even more people watching? The humiliation would deepen, and his authority might crumble completely. So he remained silent, trapped between his pride and his fear. The employees, however, could not stop discussing the janitor. At lunch breaks, they shared stories they had heard from him about his grandfather who had taught him the game, about the lessons hidden within the movements of the pieces. He said chess is like life, one employee whispered. If you only look at the present move, you'll be trapped. But if you think ahead, you'll see the truth. These words spread almost as quickly as the story of the match, becoming a quiet source of inspiration among the staff. Some began to reflect on their own lives. They realized how often they had dismissed people based on appearance or position. They thought about how they had overlooked the janitor for years, walking past him without a greeting, never imagining he carried such wisdom. The lesson was clear: greatness could live in anyone, even those who worked in the shadows. For the janitor, nothing changed in his routine, but something changed in his heart. He felt a sense of peace knowing that he had shown the truth without anger, without pride, and without force. He had not tried to embarrass the CEO, he had simply played the game as it was meant to be played. And in doing so, he had reminded everyone, including himself, that respect is not earned through wealth or titles but through actions, humility, and quiet strength. One afternoon, as he was cleaning the lobby, a group of employees gathered near the entrance. They were discussing a problem with a project, struggling to find a solution. The janitor listened quietly as he worked, then, almost without thinking, offered a simple suggestion. At first, they were surprised he had spoken up, but when they considered his idea, they realized it made sense. They followed it, and later that week, the project moved forward smoothly. It was then that people began to see him as more than just the man who cleaned the floors. They saw him as someone who observed, someone who thought deeply, and someone who carried wisdom in more ways than one. The chess match had opened their eyes, but his quiet actions afterward kept them open. The CEO noticed this shift. He watched from a distance as employees greeted the janitor warmly, as they sought his advice in small matters, and as they treated him with genuine respect. Each time, it felt like another crack in the wall of authority he had built around himself. His anger simmered, but he could not show it. To lash out at the janitor would only make him look smaller, and so he kept his silence, even as bitterness grew inside him. One evening, as the janitor was leaving the building, he paused by the glass doors and looked back at the shining office behind him. He knew the whispers would fade eventually, that people would move on to other stories. But what mattered to him was not the fame or the attention. What mattered was the reminder he had given to himself, to the employees, and perhaps even to the CEO, that respect is not about power. It is about humility, kindness, and the strength to remain calm even in the face of arrogance. The janitor walked into the night, his steps steady, his heart light. He knew his work would continue as always, but he also knew that something had changed forever. The people around him now carried a new understanding, a new respect, and a new story they would tell again and again. And though the CEO tried to bury the memory, though he fought to silence the whispers, the truth remained. In one short match, the janitor had shown the world that true greatness is not measured by wealth or status but by the quiet brilliance of the mind and the dignity of the heart. The story of the match refused to fade away. Weeks had passed, yet the whispers still traveled through the office halls, carried in the smiles of employees and the glances they exchanged whenever the janitor walked by. The video of the game, though shared quietly, had found its way far beyond the walls of the company. Friends showed it to friends, strangers retold it in their own words, and it spread like a tale meant to be remembered. Wherever it went, the lesson remained the same: never underestimate someone because of their place in life. The CEO, however, lived in the shadow of that memory. He wore his suits as sharply as ever, held his meetings with authority, and continued to speak with confidence, but inside he wrestled with the weight of his pride. Each time he saw the janitor quietly sweeping a hallway or carrying his mop bucket, a flicker of unease ran through him. He knew that the man he had once mocked had defeated him in front of everyone. No amount of wealth or power could erase that truth. The employees noticed the change in their leader. He still demanded results, still pushed them hard, but there was less laughter in his words, less ease in his smile. For the first time, he seemed human, fallible, imperfect, vulnerable. Some pitied him, others resented him, but many simply remembered the day when his arrogance had been broken in 3 simple moves. The janitor, however, carried none of this weight. He lived as he always had, simply, quietly, with a calm presence that grew more respected each day. People stopped him in the hallways to greet him warmly, and some even asked for advice about life beyond chess. They wanted to hear his thoughts on patience, on hard work, on humility, and he always answered with simple words that touched their hearts. "Life is not about rushing," he once told a young employee who was worried about falling behind. "It's about moving carefully, one step at a time, like chess. If you plan with patience, you will always find your way." Slowly, the janitor became more than just a worker in the building. He became a symbol. To the employees, he represented the truth that brilliance can hide in plain sight, that dignity and wisdom do not wear expensive clothes, and that respect must be earned, not demanded. People began to treat not only him but also others around them with more kindness. They remembered that every person carries a story, often unseen, often unheard, but always worth respecting. Outside the company, the tale continued to grow. It was told in schools as an example of humility. It appeared in small magazines and blogs that focused on inspiring real-life moments. People across the city, who had never met the janitor, spoke of him with admiration. Some even visited the building just to see him, though he always smiled politely and returned to his work without fuss. He never let the attention change him. To him, he was simply a man doing his job, living his life, and sharing a little wisdom when asked. The CEO, watching all of this, felt a deep conflict inside him. His pride wanted to push back, to reclaim the authority that had slipped away, but another part of him, quieter, smaller, began to understand the lesson. He realized that in his arrogance, he had believed himself untouchable, better than those around him. Yet the janitor, a man he had never once respected, had taught him the most powerful lesson of his life. Still, admitting that truth out loud was harder than any business deal he had ever faced. One evening, long after most employees had left, the CEO stayed in his office, staring at the city lights. The chessboard sat in front of him, the pieces neatly arranged. He touched them one by one, replaying the moves in his mind. He thought about the janitor's calm face, about the silence in the room when the word checkmate was spoken, and about the respect the man had earned without ever raising his voice. Slowly, for the first time, the CEO felt not anger but gratitude. The defeat had hurt him, yes, but it had also opened his eyes. The next morning, he did something no one expected. As the janitor polished the lobby floor, the CEO walked down from his office and stopped beside him. The employees who saw this froze, their eyes wide with shock. Never before had the CEO stopped to speak to the janitor. The two men stood facing each other, the leader of the company and the man who cleaned its floors. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then the CEO extended his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice carried no arrogance, no pride, only sincerity. "You taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn." The janitor looked at him, his eyes calm, and shook his hand gently. "It was only a game," he replied softly. But everyone who heard knew it had been more than that. It had been a turning point, a reminder, a lesson that would remain long after the memory of the actual moves faded. From that day, the CEO changed, little by little. He still carried authority, still demanded excellence, but he no longer looked down on those around him. He listened more, spoke with more patience, and treated even the quietest voices with respect. His pride had been humbled, and in its place grew something stronger: understanding. The janitor continued as he always had, working in silence, guiding those who asked, and living with dignity. He did not seek fame or reward, but his story became a light for others. For the employees, he was living proof that greatness could exist in the simplest of people, and that humility was stronger than arrogance. For the CEO, he was a teacher in disguise, a man who had given him the gift of humility. And so, the tale of the match lived on. Not as a story of humiliation, but as a story of wisdom. A janitor had defeated a CEO in 3 moves, yes, but more importantly, he had shown the world that respect, patience, and humility are worth more than titles and wealth. It was a story that inspired laughter, awe, and reflection wherever it was told, reminding everyone who heard it that you never truly know the strength that lies within another person. The janitor returned to his quiet work each day with a gentle smile, carrying with him no crown, no prize, no wealth, only the simple joy of knowing that, in his own small way, he had changed lives. And in that truth, he had achieved something far greater than victory on a chessboard.